I have absolutely no, let's say, commitments or anything in my environment what would stress me, but I still cannot just sit down, lie down, and not stress. And especially it happens on the bad days. Like the good days, let's say, yeah, I can have a nap and it's easy, but the bad days, and it goes in the circle.
Welcome to Therapeutic Tuesday. And it's in these sessions where I'm sharing some mini consultations of me working with real life patients. And as of the last week, I didn't have any real context and background. I just had a little email that Katrina, who I'm working with, had sent to Jenny, who helped arrange the time slot. And what came out in this session is, well, kind of on the surface, what Katrina wanted to work on was trying to be more effective in calming her maladaptive stress response. And she didn't feel she was being very effective with the tools that she had to work with that. What became clear to me in the session is that her relationship with herself, so her relationship with her symptoms, with her emotions, with her body, was in of itself triggering and driving her stress response. And so working on cultivating more of a place of self-care, of self-love, of a more gentle relationship with herself seemed to be a helpful way of starting to calm the system. The session's called Self-Love Calms the Nervous System, and I think it will make more sense as you kind of get into watching the session. This was one of the first of these mini sessions that I filmed, so I was still figuring out some of the production pieces. You'll kind of see as these sessions unfold that hopefully the production's improving, but I don't think it really gets in the way of the messages that come from it. So here's Katrina and Self-Love Calms the Nervous System. Okay, great. We made it.
Finally.
So how do I pronounce your name? Is it Katrina?
Yeah, exactly.
Katrina, great.
Yeah.
Nice to meet you. Thank you for being part of this experiment. So I saw your email, which there's obviously some good bits in there. I think maybe the most helpful starting point, just do you want to say a bit more about the kind of question you've got and what I may be able to help with? And just in terms of kind of context, we've got up to half an hour. It's obviously not enough space to do a kind of full deep dive of the session, but it will be a bit more just answering a question. So we'll kind of be interactive, and we'll just see if we can get somewhere useful for you.
I can start with that first question about maladaptive stress response. So I'll give a bit of background how I worked on it. I started working with clinic and recovering like 1.5 years ago. It was the beginning of my illness as well. Like I started basically the same month. So at the beginning, I started with telephone treatment and I started trying to work with stop process and so on. But there was like so much mess, let's say, of like sorting out the whole life around me going on, and so many emotions. So I kind of had to stop with the stops, and for the whole year, mostly like we were working on emotions, EFT, past issues, and dealing with the whole mess. And like this year, and of course, like the stress came down a little bit, and I saw some improvement. But this year, my environment became completely stable. Like I settled down where I'm recovering, and all those stressors went away. All the past, not all, but lots of past issues were sorted. But the thing is, so like I realized that all my thoughts, like all my attention is all about what you call Windows ME. I see everything from there. It's not even Windows, it's like a box I'm in. So I started again trying to work with stops and similar tools. We tried with Marie to work around, but the thing is, I just cannot seem to do it. Like I start to work with it a couple of days in, and the tool itself makes me stressed. Like whenever I have to pick it up, it makes me stressed. Short one, let's say like, okay, more or less sometimes the long one, I can't even do it. It like almost makes me shaky. And in general, like I have absolutely no, let's say, commitments or anything in my environment what would stress me, but I still cannot just sit down, lie down, and not stress. And especially it happens on the bad days. Like the good days, let's say, yeah, I can have a nap and it's easy, but the bad days, and it goes in the circle. I try to do the tools, like I try some different one, and I just get stressed from it. I drop it. I get annoyed. The bad day comes. I get more annoyed, and then all over again. Then I say, let's say, the better day comes. I'll try again. I try again, and nothing happens. And I keep living in this like little box, running the circle.
Okay, I think I'm getting a sense of it. Where are you at in terms of physical recovery? Like, it sounds like you've got a fairly stable baseline, and are you making gradual progress? Do you feel like you're plateaued? Yeah, like where's that piece?
So I definitely was making progress last year. This year I'm a bit of plateau. Like it's like on good days, let's say I can go for a walk, I can like meet a friend sometimes, like I can cook, I can do things for myself, but nothing outside of that, like one activity a day, let's say. On bad days, I can't really do anything, and like just basically try to rest and stay low. And it's like I have 3, 4 good days or 2 good days and one bad day, and the cycle continues, and not really moving. The only thing that maybe started to improving is my sleep got a bit better, and I sorted all the like secondary symptoms, let's say, but this like good bad days jumping is just.
Do you feel like the pattern of good days to bad days is changing at all? Do you feel like, for example, you have more good days and less bad days, or the good periods last a bit longer, the bad periods less as long, the good periods are a bit high, the bad periods a bit less low, or do you feel like it's just a kind of a consistent plateau this year so far?
More or less, it's consistent plateau. It's the same trend, let's say, how symptoms come up. Good days did become a bit better, and the sleep became a bit better, but bad days are the same better, the same frequency. Like let's say end of last year or like second half of last year.
And do you feel like you're in a stress state or a healing state most of the time? Like, where does your nervous system feel? So I get that when you go to work on it at the moment, that's triggering a stress response. But when you're not working on it and you're just kind of in your kind of baseline kind of level, where would you say your nervous system is?
So it depends. On a good day, it's quite calm, I would think. Like it's quite, I can relax it if I'm not like too emotional. On a bad day, definitely no healing state there. I get like quite spiraling down with my thoughts. So it could be better. Like it could be definitely better.
Mm-hmm.
Even let's say like today, I try to have a nap, and it just like I get a bit agitated all over the place.
Sure. And are you using other tools outside of stop process? So are you using kind of guided relaxations, meditation, and how do those things work for you?
Yeah, so I used like loads and loads of different tools like that. Meditation definitely more or less like every day, like as much as I can, or even a few times a day. Guided relaxations I use like I alternate. Like sometimes I just listen to music, sometimes I would listen guided relaxation, sometimes I would do something like yoga nidra or gentle yoga, because I notice like if I do the same thing every single day, it starts really stressing me out. I just like I can't keep like very strict routine somehow. Like it just so I try to shift them around.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it sounds like you're putting a lot of effort into your recovery. So well done for committing to the process. It's obviously it's a challenging process, and sometimes it has its twists and turns, and it's not just energy invested necessarily results in the output. Sometimes it's just little tweaks kind of here and there that can be really important. I think there's a few things that may or may not be going on. So one of the patterns that can happen is that as we start to realize the importance of being in a healing state, there's almost like this whole extra pressure and stress to get into a healing state. So rather than it being kind of recognizing that we're in a kind of stress pattern and we kind of stop and we kind of calm our system, it's like we do it and then it's like, oh my God, it's not working. And then we start to get stressed about being stressed. And often what fuels that pattern is the inner critic. So all the kind of patterns around, you're not doing it right, it's not going to work, you can't do this, you don't have what it takes, it's not going to last. So we start to get all these layers of stress on top of doing the process. So then it isn't actually, when we do the process, it's not like we just do a stop. What we do is a stop and about 100 other things at the same time, which means that the stop almost gets polluted to become this kind of source of stress and anxiety. I don't know, does that resonate at all? It may or may not be that. I'm exploring a few possible options, but yeah.
Yeah, it does resonate in the sense that, yes, like I feel a bit of pressure not to be stressed and like not to think about the illness, let's say, like that, because there are some occasions randomly when I feel like I get out of that like box, like very random thing, like I have to travel quite a lot, like move the countries. When I'm in the airport, on the plane, where you would think it's a stressful environment, I feel like I have better. It's like I don't think about anything. It's my favorite, like flying is my favorite spot, so I just don't think about it. So I thought maybe like I'll find some course. I went to art course, but when I try to do it intentionally, that's it. Like it's like the stress goes on. It's like just unintentionally something like that happens. But yeah, like the pressure that yes, I have to be not stressed. I have to find something relaxing to do, and keep up with my routine and not to think about what I have to do, like about the illness.
How are your energy levels when you go out and do activities from time to time? Like, do you notice a significant tiring of your energy when you go out and do stuff, or do you find that can give you energy sometimes?
It depends. It depends. Like sometimes it gives some energy, especially if like it's, let's say, quite a good day, but I feel a bit agitated. If I go for a walk and like I don't know, have a tea somewhere outside or the park, yes, it refreshes me. But sometimes when I'm like, okay, I will go now for a calm walk and like read a book, no, or like I'll go to socialize and always or in the cafe. That's it. I start listening to that person and my head goes crazy.
So I think part of it is I think you're suffering from what I call environmental tiredness, that you're becoming tired by the repetitiveness of the environment that you're in. Because the fact that you say when you go to a completely different environment, when you travel, you go on a plane, like it actually lifts your energy. So we talk about 4 types of tiredness. We're at mental tiredness, emotional tiredness, physical tiredness, and environmental tiredness. So I think part of what's happening is you set up a whole bunch of triggers, obviously unconsciously, but a whole bunch of triggers in your environment that kind of remind you to be triggered and in a kind of stressed kind of response. So when you change the environment, and particularly when you quite significantly change the environment, it takes away those triggers and it allows your kind of state to shift. Does that also resonate a certain amount?
That does resonate because I'm very used to change countries, change places, and just like sitting in one room and one house. But so that's why like I kind of feel a bit stuck in this limbo because I don't have that much energy to like completely like take on some like bigger activity. But at the same time, yeah, it's like sometimes I wake up and like again the same breakfast, the same like activity, the same meditation, the same bed, the same room.
Yeah. So your stress response, do you have a sense of what the stress response is trying to like get for you, like what its purpose is? You know, so it's like your nervous system's kind of activating and it's turning on. And obviously it's become maladaptive, or we call it a maladaptive stress response. But obviously it has some kind of intention or some kind of purpose of why it's stimulating in the way that it is. Do you have a sense of what that is?
I'm not too sure. Like in general or specifically in this situation?
I think probably more generally at this point.
Like, I guess it's a danger, like for the body is something like a danger. It's something, yeah, so imagine it as a danger. And I can even feel it, like, let's say if I go and socialize with someone, which is completely normal activity, and I get like so stressed about it. And so it feels like, yeah, like go away from me. So it's obvious, like that it's a bit, yeah,
Yeah.
dangerous.
So yeah, exactly. So what's most likely happened is and I'm making a whole bunch of assumptions here because I haven't reviewed your case, but when I imagine when you first started to get sick and the time leading up to that, you were probably pushing through, ignoring your body, and your body wasn't getting your attention. And so it kind of turns on in a kind of danger response to try and protect you and try and keep you safe. The problem is I think you already know, that response then becomes its own source of problems, because then the fact is that your nervous system's overactivated, and then that is draining your energy, affecting your digestion, your sleep, your immune system, and all the kind of things that go with that. So I think what's happening at the moment is you're kind of in a bit of an inner civil war, in a sense that you're kind of at war with yourself, of like recognizing that there's the stress response, being stressed about trying to turn off the stress response. And it's almost like the strategy, and this is quite common, that the strategy that you're using to solve the problem is the same level at which the problem is being created. So you're in stress, and then you're in stress trying to not be in stress, which is then perpetuating and creating more stress. So what we need to try to do is to come at this from a different perspective, like a way of relating to yourself and to your experience, which is different to how you would normally do that. So rather than making the stress response wrong and trying to get rid of it, what I would encourage is being curious towards it and open towards it, and almost being appreciative. Like, this response in your system is working unbelievably hard to take care of you, to try and protect you, to try and keep you safe. And yeah, so it's almost like it's trying to protect you and keep you safe, and then you're in this kind of battle with it. What sometimes can work really well is to, rather than try to stop it and to kind of break the pattern, is to almost approach it from a point of view of, it's like your nervous system is like a traumatized child who is like, you've adopted a child that's been in some like really abusive kind of traumatic environment, and you need to gain that child's trust. And if you try to gain that child's trust by telling it to stop screaming, or to stop acting out, or to, stop misbehaving and just kind of like get cross with it, what you're actually going to do is you're going to inflame that behavior more, and you're going to cause more distance and more frustration. So you want to see this like a relationship where you need to rebuild the trust between you and your nervous system. And some of the ways that help doing that, one of which is being really patient and really sensitive and gentle and caring towards it. The fascinating thing about children is that they have a remarkable ability to suss out bullshit. So let's say, for example, you're playing with a child and you're giving it your attention, but really what you're doing is you're completely distracted and sidetracked. You're thinking about something else. They know, and that's why they kind of escalate their behavior to try and get your attention. Yeah. So part of what this part of you needs, this part of you which is like the kind of scared part which is trying to keep you safe and trying to protect you, is it needs softness, and it needs gentleness, and it needs sensitivity, and it needs appreciation, and it needs to be thanked for how hard it's working, as a way of starting to rebuild that trust and rebuild that relationship. Before we talk about practically how to do that, does that make sense as a kind of principle?
Yeah, it does make sense, because, yeah, like even from the beginning, how I got sick, I never had like that crash state. I started on like very high alert state where like my sleep went away completely, and my even test results showed like 3 times the norm of cortisol and so
Wow,
on.
well done. That's impressive.
Yeah, it was quite high, and it's like not it, my whole life was like kind of always being quite hard and tense and stressed, and not even my life, my whole family, like everyone around me. So yeah, that softness like is is a big challenge, and patience and softness, and just like be patient. That's definitely like, yeah, one of the biggest challenges
Yeah.
throughout this.
Yeah, and it's approaching your body and your symptoms with that perspective, and it takes time to cultivate and develop a capacity that we haven't learned, as a child. Like if you were, how we parent and respond to our own emotions and feelings is an imprint of how our parents responded to us. So if we felt upset or scared and our parents told us to get over it, stop complaining about it, or we felt kind of scared about something and they said, stop being pathetic, there's nothing to be scared about, then we kind of internalized this way of how our parents related to us emotionally. Unless we do something to change it, it's how we relate to ourselves emotionally. So it makes sense that your maladaptive stress response is completely allergic to and intolerant to being told off or being criticized or being rejected. It's like when you try to get rid of it and try to make it go away and get frustrated at it for being there, you're basically re-traumatizing a pattern that's had some difficult history inside of you.
Yeah, that makes sense. Also because I notice another thing when I calm down, like I don't have now very intense emotions. It's passed away, but like when it was like the stage where I would get real emotional and lots of crying, if I would like get really frustrated, crying out like for I don't know 3 hours before going to sleep, next morning I would wake up like fresh and nice, like.
Isn't that interesting?
It's like, oh, interesting. I thought nice, but
Yeah.
I don't do it for purpose just to get calm.
Yeah, I think what your body and what your nervous system need is to be loved and cared into calmness rather than beaten and demanded into calmness. And so the way at which you come at it needs to be different. And, it's like, I remember when I was at university and I had this female friend at university, platonic friend, that we became really close. We ended up being study partners, and we're still friends many, many years later. And we would, go out with a bunch of friends on like a kind of Friday or Saturday night. Everyone would go home, and people would hug goodbye. And she would go to give me a hug, and I'd be like this kind of like statue, like, because my family didn't hug, and it was like she literally had to teach me how to hug. She was like, "What you need to do is stand there, relax your body, put your arms around." I literally had to be taught the process of hugging, because I didn't know how to do that. And the same thing I think is true here in terms of not necessarily in a physical sense of hugging, but an emotional sense of softness in terms of how you relate to and you meet your own inner landscape, your own feelings, your own emotions, your own symptoms. And it's like anything else, it's something you can learn to do. It's a practice, and it's a practice that in a sense, what you can't do is approach it the way that you're used to doing, which is like, right, I'm going to drill this like 100 times a day. I'm going to tell my body that I love it and it's all fine. Like there has to be a kind of a softness and a kind of sensitivity and a care to it. And that is on a number of levels. So part of that is looking at your inner critic. So looking at how you communicate to yourself. And I'll send you a link to a video as part that one of the modules on conscious transformation, which is a kind of piece around the inner critic. So I think that'll be helpful to put some awareness around that. So I'd work with some work around the inner critic, then also looking at if you're going to use stock process and EFT and those kind of things, practice using it from a point of view of like, rather than being like, stop, of it being a kind of like, you're okay, settle, stop, like kind of reassuring, encouraging internal dialogue. Also looking at, I imagine your life has become quite full of things that are quite boring and quite unpleasurable and kind of nurturing in a sense. So I'd also take some time to review like your routine and your habits. And like, I know there's limitations in terms of energy and what you can do. So I'm sensitive to that. But like where there is fun, where there's kind of play, where there's gentleness, where there's pleasure, where there's things in your life, and those things are completely different, obviously, for different people, but there are things in your life that feel self-nurturing and self-nourishing.
Yeah, so yeah, this one definitely, I agree. But I had an issue with like trying to bring in more fun as well. Like, I tried to find everything what I used to like to do as hobbies and what I can do at home. Like, I mean, like reading, writing a book, drawing. Even I tried to learn to play piano, but somehow, like when I know that it's like I do it just because I'm sick, it doesn't like become so much fun. Or maybe for a day or two, and then it's like, bullshit.
What,
Don't
what,
like
what,
this.
what would you be doing if you weren't ill? Like, what would you, if you weren't ill and you were living the life you truly want to live, not the life that you were necessarily conditioned or told you should be living, but like if you were really living in service of your own dreams and your own passions, what would your life look like right now?
There would be definitely much more socializing, being outside, being outside. So I do that as much as I can. Like if I manage to go to the park or the beach, then it definitely is really good for me. I can feel it straight away if I can manage. But yeah, for me, like I am used to change and people around me and movement. So when like it's activity, kind of force the hobby, then it gets a little bit, or not even just like it's all okay. I mean, like I always wanted to like go deeper into drawing, but I guess in my mind it's like I do it because I'm sick. So
Yeah,
the relationship to that.
I think what happens as well is I think your inner critic hijacks your experience. So you might be doing something like you're doing drawing, and actually initially you're probably quite enjoying it and it's quite pleasurable and there's not really an outcome. And then your inner critic starts to come in and says, oh, well, you're just doing it because you're sick and it's not very good anyway and you should be doing it better. And, I think there's layers of judgment that start to come into your experience, which then distort your experience and kind of take the pleasure out of what you're doing by putting a lot of judgment on top of it.
So like with activity, I don't necessarily think it's judgment. It's more like it gets like boring, like it exhausts itself like very quickly, and it's like, I mean, like I get a bit like bullshit. I'm not even enjoying it anyway, so why not trying to do it?
Is there some achiever pattern that comes in there as well?
Yeah, like definitely.
Yeah, so I think maybe it's less, maybe the inner critic's a bit further upstream on it. I think that probably the bit that you're noticing is that the achiever patterns is just like, it's not enough. Like I need to do more. I need to kind of move faster. I need to do something more interesting. Like there's a push that gets in the way of just being there in the experience that you're having.
Yeah, there is that, and a little bit there is also kind of, I don't know how to say, tiredness from the recovery process. So it's like I just don't want to do anything. Sometimes it feels in a way. So there is achiever in like everything. I mean, like trying to perfect a diet, trying to do meditation perfectly. At the same time, then like sometimes I sit down and like, to be honest, all I want to do is binge watch Netflix.
Do you give yourself days off the recovery process?
I try, especially like this week, when my family's away. It's a holiday for me too. But my mind doesn't get a holiday, so that's the point. Like, you don't get holidays from your brain. Like, it's just
Sure. Yeah.
active.
So my sense in terms of where to kind of direct and kind of where to kind of progress with this is, I think I don't know if you're familiar with the kind of idea of kind of yin and yang, like the kind of two different kind of qualities of energy, but there's the kind of the yang energy, which is the kind of the pushing, the doing, the striving, the achiever, the moving forwards. And there's the yin, which is the kind of surrender, the vulnerability, the kind of the sensitivity, the letting go, the allowing, the kind of being in the kind of flow of what's happening. And I think you've lived in it sounds like in an environment and a culture and in a kind of world which is heavily rewarded yang and had very little respect for the yin. And so the orientation here is, how do you cultivate a more yin way of relating to yourself, a softer, more gentle, more sensitive, more caring? And I think that's on a macro level. So in terms of like the things that you do and the kind of process, the kind of decisions that you kind of make and how you use your time, but it's also on a micro level in terms of how you're relating to yourself moment to moment, day to day. Part of what creates the rigidity and the structure here is the inner critic piece, which is why I kind of mentioned that.
Yeah.
But it's also a practice of cultivating self-love and self-care. And that comes down to going back to what I was saying a little bit earlier, of your nervous system is like a traumatized child that you need to rebuild trust with. And I think if you approach it with that perspective, that rather than seeing it as something that's wrong to be fixed and to be disciplined, you see it as something to be cared for and loved and understood, and kind of, it's like, wow, it's been through so much. Of course it feels so agitated. If you approach it from that perspective, I think that will soften quite a lot the way that you work with it. Does that make some sense?
Yeah, it does make sense, because until now, of course, like I started doing a lot of more yin activities and stuff, but it's just, I guess I do it a bit like out of, okay, now I have to do it. I have to
You
do
do
it.
activity from a yang perspective.
All day long, like I have to sit in meditation, and if I'm like that, it will be fine. So it's like achieving the softness in a way, but it doesn't work like that, I guess.
Yeah, it's a practice, and it's not a practice that's just important from the point of view of your recovery. It's a practice that's also important for your life, and I think that's an important kind of frame within which to look at this, that you're learning a way of relating to yourself which is important for your health and wellness and happiness for your whole life. And it takes time. You've spent your whole life up to this point mastering how to be hard on yourself and how to be harsh to yourself. So it takes practice. And as I was saying a bit earlier, we tend to try to solve the problem at the level we created the problem. And that's where you try to kind of push your way to recovery and try to kind of fix it and kind of project recovery. Like, and in a sense, it's holding all of that more lightly and more gently. I'm just mindful of time in terms of just summarizing and kind of giving you just a kind of few practical steps. So I'm going to send you this inner critic module, and I think doing some work around that, I think would be really helpful. I think looking at your activities and your kind of daily structure, and I think you've already been doing this somewhat anyway, but making sure you've got these pieces of fun that are in there. If when you're doing those things, you're being hijacked by the achiever and the pushing, that's something to work with. And the more awareness you have on that, the more you can start to get free from that. And then this third thing is how you're relating to yourself moment to moment, day to day. When you get your symptoms, treat them like a traumatized child that needs love and care. When you're if you're using the stop process, make sure your stop is less of a stop and more of a kind of inner hug, in a sense, like an inner kind of softness that's there. And take away the expectation of like, you need to get to a healing state. Maybe it's, rather than if you're at an 8 and you're trying to get down to a 3, maybe it's just an 8 to a 7.9. It's literally just a subtle kind of shift that just comes from that being more gentle and more soft towards yourself in terms of how you're relating.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What I'd like to suggest is that you put that into practice over the next few weeks, and then send me an email and let me know how you're doing. And then we can maybe have a little kind of follow up like this, or we can just kind of see kind of where things are. But I think that my primary suggestion is this much heavier emphasis towards the more yin, the more self-care, the more self-loving. See the stress response as something to be cared for and nurtured, rather than something to be stopped and interrupted. And I think that might just start to bring the edge. And we're not trying to go, the moment you're going from here, you're trying to stop it, you're going up to here. What we want to do is go from here and just soften the edge. We're not trying to force it down, we're just trying to soften the edge. And that will then gradually allow things to start to soften.
Yeah, I guess like I was seeing it a bit more like you say, I need to go all the way down and not to be like zero stress, otherwise like it's never not gonna happen.
If you go 0.1% a week, even in 10 weeks, you've gone 1%. And I mean 1% on a chart to 10. I don't mean on a chart to 100. If you go put it another way, if you go 1% each week, you're going 10% over 10 weeks, and it takes time to unlock these patterns that have got so much history and so much kind of tension that's built into it. But you can't, when you've got the history that you've got, you can't force yourself to a healing state. You have to nurture and soothe yourself to a healing state.
Yeah, makes sense. Yeah, I guess like the patience and in a way achieve a pattern that like why can't just do it in 6 months and that's it, comes good and then at least like now I see it a bit more. Like at the beginning it was a bit different story, but yeah, that makes
Yeah, it sounds like you've got really good awareness in terms of seeing the patterns. It's just the strategy you're using is fueling them more at the moment.
Yeah, that's the point. Like I can see the patterns. I struggle to shift them.
Yeah. Explore approaching it in this way. Send me an email. You've got my email address. Send me an email in a couple of weeks. Let me know how you're doing, and then we'll kind of explore things from there.
Okay. Thank you.
Any final questions you've got?
No, I think I'm good.
Okay, good. Thank you for experimenting this way. I appreciate it. And yeah, please do follow up with me, and we'll explore that further.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks for your time. Thanks. Bye. So I hope that session was useful. I think this principle around self-love is often a missed piece for people. I think when we're coming from the point of view of seeing our achiever and our anxiety and helper patterns, we can almost be trying to change things at the problem at the level we created it. So the kind of harshness of our pushing is then the harshness we use to try and stop the pushing. So I really think the self-love piece is important, and it's a theme that we will develop more in the blog and the podcast as it develops. If you want to share your experiences, I think the place where I'm planning on being the most interactive is on Instagram. So you can find my hashtag alexhowell.tv on Instagram. That's also the website for this series, alexhowell.tv. If you're interested in having one of these mini sessions, you can reach out to Jenny at theoptimumhealthclinic.com, who can help arrange, can see if it's a fit. There's certain things that are and aren't, I think, a fit for these mini sessions, but she'll help curate and organize there. Tomorrow we have Wellness Wednesday, and we have an excerpt from Dr. David Brady's interview as part of the Fatigue Super Conference, where we are talking about fibromyalgia and the role of what in Optimum Health Clinic language we would classify as maladaptive stress response, and the role that plays in fibromyalgia. So I look forward to talking with you then.